Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and this is Joe on Joe, the only podcast where we watch every episode of G.I. Joe, the Real American Hero, animated series in sequential order, episode by episode. And if you're listening to this episode, and if you've listened from day one, this has been a 3-year journey, ladies and gentlemen. This is the final episode of G.I. Joe, the animated series, that we're going to be doing here on Joe for the time being. This is the culmination of a 3-year journey of many, many wonderful episodes, many bad episodes, and a couple episodes so terrible we saved them for last. And I am honored and happy, and it's been a long time coming for my guests today. They are both military veterans from, in their words, the only branch of military that exists, the U.S. Army.
Hoorah. Yeah,
Hoorah.
It's definitely, yeah.
That's
I want to welcome their film and television producers, directors. They work directly with VME, the Veterans in Media and Entertainment. Please welcome. I was going to get I forgot to get your official U.S. Army name. You were captain?
No, I was
What were
Lieutenant Kraft.
Lieutenant Karen Kraft.
Captain Rebecca Murga.
Captain Rebecca Murga, welcome to Joe on Joe.
Yeah,
Woo!
buddy.
So glad to be here. We finally made it.
I'm very excited to have you.
Right.
Karen, you're awesome. You work with a ton of geek pop culture stuff out here in LA and with mainstream stuff, and you're really killing it in Hollywood, making all kinds of documentaries, producing things. You've worked on the Discovery Channel. You've worked on Shark Week.
Wow. Years ago. It was so
Years
much fun.
ago.
Yeah.
And primarily, you are the you're the spearhead for an organization called Veterans in Media and Entertainment, VME. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, Veterans in Media and Entertainment is a group of over 3,400 vets now out here, mostly in Los Angeles, but we have chapters in D.C., New York, Atlanta, and emerging chapters in Austin and Chicago. And we are a group of veterans that are looking just to connect with other veterans who want to be in the industry. So all career paths, writers, producers, directors, HR people, legal, marketing people, everyone who served in the Army and those other branches. What are those other branches?
I don't know.
Yeah, right.
I think
kidding.
on this show, it's the other branches of the Dreadnoks,
Right.
the Iron Grenadiers, Darklon's Army. I forget what that's called.
Yep, that sounds about right.
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
that's a nickname for the Air Force, I think.
Oh, yeah. Okay, fair enough.
But-
And that's great. So you're like a
We're an
real
alumni
life-
group.
You're a real alumni group. That's
what
exactly
we are. We're an
the word.
alumni group which we all share military service in common, and we have vets of all generations part of our group. Over 100 Vietnam vets who are many of them working in the industry. Luis Soto's directing a project right now.
and
Tucker
it's
Smallwood,
directors, actors, animators.
Yes.
It's literally anyone who's been in service who then wants to do something in the creative / media arts field. Video games, right?
Absolutely, all of that. It's all.
It's funny, too, because, veterans are not new to Hollywood. Right after World War II, some of the most amazing filmmakers of all time, Frank Capra,
Yes.
came back from World War II, and It's a Wonderful Life was the first film he made after the war. And so you had a lot of amazing filmmakers.
Was that documentary just came out? Was it called And Five Came Back?
Five came back,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Which
that's
is
an amazing documentary.
outstanding, and really looked at. It's based on a book, but really looked at what these filmmakers did as far as because these were filmmakers who were Academy Award nominated and award-winning filmmakers who left the success here in Hollywood, went to fight in the war, and then came back, and all had very different experiences in the war. And, were some of the, they really were trailblazers of our time as far as filmmakers. I'm a director and have studied their work for years. And so when you look at this new crop of military veterans who are coming back from the wars, I served in Iraq and Afghanistan, it hasn't always been that way. World War II, we really embraced them. And then during Vietnam, you had a lot of veterans hiding who they were when they came here. And our organization really sprouted up in trying to give veterans who are seeking to tell their story, but trying to make it in this industry and in their various careers, have a place to go, have a community, and have the support that they need. And, Karen has been instrumental really in helping find veterans jobs, and she can talk a little bit about the job and internship program. But it's really having that support behind you that used to be there in the golden age of television. Directors supported one another. Studios got behind directors. That's with the content that comes out now. You don't really have that community, and that's what VME does, is provide that community.
That's awesome. And Rebecca, you are first of all, we got to call it out. You're originally from Chicago.
Come on, baby.
Chi-town
Come on, baby.
Chi-town
Bears. Hey, the
Yeah,
Bears. The Bears.
And your
G.I. Joe versus the Bears.
Well, listen, first of all, my friend, G.I. Joe team had a member of the Bears on it in William the Refrigerator parody.
There
right?
you go.
So
you go.
So literally, the Bears are always ready to be talked about on a G.I. Joe podcast.
There you go.
So let's talk about that. But you're in the Disney ABC Directors Program.
That's correct. So, born and raised in Chicago, I always say I'm a product of two things, which is one, the great city of Chicago, which
And the
is
second thing is sausage.
and the second thing is sausage, and the third thing is my military experience. And so I feel that specifically in Chicago, it was so rich with like theater. And one of the first things I ever saw in the theater as a young poor kid from Humboldt Park is Gary Sinise used to give out tickets to a lot of young inner city kids, and I got to see him on that stage at Steppenwolf. In Streetcar Named Desire.
Amazing.
Which was
Lieutenant
outstanding.
Dan,
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, from there, I ended up joining the military and came out here. And I got into the ABC directing program. They accept 8 directors every 2 years and have studied under some amazing directors. And really, a lot of that has come through like some of the mentorships and guidance of the Veterans in Media Entertainment, who a lot of the work that I did coming in, I got crew from this group. I got a lot of mentorship and guidance from Karen, who had, you really, I think to make it in this industry, you have to work on your craft, but you also have to understand the business. And I feel like people don't really teach you that, specifically if you're a Puerto Rican kid from Chicago. And so having a community.
I could testify to that.
Come on now. Nobody teaches you. Nobody teaches you nothing.
Listen, we just had our DNA test done, and mine came back white.
It was just 100% white.
I think it came back lily white.
Yeah, you're good. That's really cool. And you've shadowed on like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which was amazing to watch, just the process of like how you take that into a scripted series. Was able to shadow on shows like Grey's Anatomy. There's a show called Unreal that shoots up in Canada. That's actually a Lifetime show. That was a fantastic show.
I think the official name of that is Unreal A. I don't want to correct you. I don't want to be that guy.
Actually, you're right. You're very right.
I'm just saying. Yeah.
You're going to the studio, eh?
And TJ Brady on Shooter.
And TJ Brady on Shooter, yeah.
Oh, cool.
So it was through VME that TJ is an amazing writer. Is he a West Point guy?
He's West Point,
Yeah.
and then he was Armor and
Army, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Right.
of
It's all
course,
the best writers are.
Well, so let's step back a little bit. Let's talk about your journey. So Karen, you're both Army. And when did you enlist? Like, what's your story? Was it right after high school? Were you like, what's?
Yeah, we don't have to give exact years, Joe.
No.
I'm teasing. I'm
When I said
teasing.
right after high school, I'm talking about like last year.
Right. Well, see,
You graduated high
You're so
school,
smart.
and you were like
crazy how-
Universal Soldier,
Right.
And they were like, she's too good. Let's get her out of here and send her
Let's
to
do it.
Hollywood. No, but like, was it
but
like
in
you signed
reality-
up right after high school, or did you?
I
like,
knew
what-
in
like,
high
what's your
school. So
journey?
my brother and I enlisted together, and he was the one that set the way. But someone in my family had always served back. Almost every generation we have to the Civil War.
Wow.
And so I actually wanted to go in the Peace Corps originally, but it was
What side of the Civil War? Just kidding. I'm kidding. You don't have to answer that.
actually, woo! Things just got hot in here.
Karen Kraft no longer has a career.
Actually, my ancestor's name was Joseph Kramer, and he was a drummer originally. He enlisted when he was 13, but he was with the 140th from New York, from Rochester, New York.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that's where I'm from, is upstate New York.
Yeah.
So,
That's
or
amazing.
Western New York. So it's cool. But all this sassing aside, right?
Yeah.
So, but I just wanted to travel, and it was my father said, if you join the military, you'll have that fraternity for life, right? Using and it was great. So my brother and I went into the military the day after. I went to basic training the day after I graduated from high school. And then the plan was to go right into college. And then I went to school, Ithaca College, and I did ROTC at Cornell. And then I kept going from there. And I was a reservist. I did some active duty on the training and a reservist. It was a very different time. It was 87 to 93, Desert Storm time.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of downsizing in 92. And so it was a very different time, but I was very proud to have served. And then it just so happened that I went and pursued medieval history as a master's, and then also filmmaking in DC. And then I got lucky through a friend, a filmmaking friend, Eric Van Ryzen, who introduced me to people at Discovery Channel, and just right place, right time.
That's crazy. I was a junior during Desert Storm in high school,
Right.
and so that was a scary time for us because the only experience we had was our previous generations of
Right.
half my dad's friends not coming back from Vietnam and all that stuff, and we were like, I don't know what's going on. Are they going to draft again? And then it ended relatively quickly.
It was super quick.
Then that weekend ended. So I thank you. I thank you because for stepping up and being a part of the service at that time. It was very important.
It was great, and I'm glad I did it. And I still have great friends to this day. I'm still very close with several people. I went through basic training and officer training.
Where'd you do basic?
So I did a basic down in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, in World War II barracks, which was pretty amazing. And they were still in the condition from World War II. So it was tons of fun.
That's very cool.
All of it, the military, especially, I think most veterans would say that. Looking back, it's always fun, right? Because even though you go through all those hardships, it really helps you out.
But at 3 a.m. when you're carrying a rock, it's
No,
not so much.
it's less
not
fun.
so much fun.
And she had a whole different military experience. Mine
Rebecca,
was
what's
light
yours?
to hers.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I was going to chime in and say that, Karen went through, our experiences are so differently because of the limitations that were put on women during that time.
Yeah.
She went in at a time where there weren't a lot of women in there. They couldn't do certain jobs. They couldn't go to certain schools. And I would say that women that went in that generation, which is in the 80s and 90s, they couldn't be fighter pilots. They couldn't, things that it doesn't even dawn on me. And I came in before the lift of the combat exclusion policy for women. It was women like her who really paved the way to allow that combat exclusion policy to be lifted so that we could have opportunities that we had. I joined, I was actually living in Pennsylvania when 9/11 happened. And I think it affected anyone who was in that industry. I loved, cartoons like G.I. Joe, and I always wanted to be in the military, but I never, I decided to go to school. And I think it was after 9/11 that I felt like I wanted to pitch in. So I ended up joining, ended up getting deployed to Iraq in 2007. And then went to Afghanistan and spent a better part of about 3 years between Iraq, Kuwait, and Afghanistan.
Wow.
And and that was prior to the combat exclusion policy. So in 2011, the military decided to start something called CSTs, which was cultural support teams, which was women for the first time being attached to Navy SEALs and Special Forces. And so I was one of the first women out there and helped to manage some of those teams, which was great. And I was really proud of the women that were on the ground.
Amazing.
But it was shortly after that, you had women who were giving their lives for this country, but not allowed to go to leadership schools, not allowed to do the jobs that they wanted to do. And so it really was amazing when they finally opened up. And there's still controversy about that. And we could have a whole nother show about, girl G.I. Joes.
Hey, listen,
the G.I. Janes, right?
Yeah, no, there was a G.I. Jane. There was, yeah.
So it was very.
Well, if I may,
Yeah,
too,
go ahead.
ironically, is that Rebecca came after her Afghanistan tour. She made the decision to pursue her passion, which is to become a director. And she came out to Hollywood and met some of the first people here, right, in the first month through our group, and built out a friendship. But ironically, her path being a director in Hollywood, it was easier to be a woman in combat.
I say that there was more women in combat in Afghanistan than there are directing in Hollywood.
That was a really good time for it.
Yeah.
What a
A lot of
change.
doors are opening. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
It's really great.
It is great. And we appreciate everyone who supported that change and continues to support that, and especially the men who see that as just being fair, right, and giving everybody that spot.
And giving everyone the chance to show what they got, because there's no inherent quality level just because you have a different set of genitalia.
Yeah.
Right.
You can all tell stories well, and then everyone has a unique perspective in which to tell it. So let's explore those perspectives.
Right. Right.
Let's see the lens through someone else's eyes and see what that lens looks like.
Correct. And I appreciate you thinking that way. Now, for our angle, it's just we're each an individual and we just want a chance to have a shot and prove ourselves.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Whether it be in the military or be here in the industry.
Yeah.
And work hard for everything and earn it.
And what's great about VME is that you guys are inclusive of all the branches, even like Coast Guard even.
Yeah.
When you invited us, Toilet Teal and I were there for for one of your meetings. We were gracious enough to have us out last year, and I remember there was one guy from the Coast Guard there.
Coastie.
Tim
There's
Shaner. I love
He was
Tim.
awesome. Yeah, no, I love. He was great. He
And
was,
so proud.
yeah, and he was so proud of me. He's like,
wonderful.
whatever he chanted, it was fantastic, and everyone loved it.
Yeah.
And there's tribalism within the group, but then there's this outward projecting sense of unity too.
So we're all every branch stands arm in arm, lockstep
right.
against the world internally, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
constant teasing,
Yeah.
poking fun, picking on the Navy.
Well, this
right?
is
And that's
also the
part of it.
type,
It's like brothers and sisters.
This is also the type of environment where if you're not picking on someone, you don't really like them. So it's kind of, it's like having a brother that you can't pick on. It's just part of what you do.
It's military culture.
So Joe and Joe listeners, you guys know that was the absolute relationship that they built in the cartoon for Wetsuit and Leatherneck. Wetsuit was a Navy diver. Leatherneck was a Marine.
I love it.
And on the cartoon, they just beat each other up, called him Jarhead the whole time.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Called him Fish
Yeah.
Face.
Yeah.
Like it was, every time they had him on, it was the most delightful relationship in all these episodes. Those two were back and forth at each other. And then the stuff would go down on the episode, and they would show they had their back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the episode would wrap up, and they would punch each other in the
It's
face.
perfect.
It's the same thing.
great.
We call each other worse names.
Yeah,
but
well,
But we're going PG here, so.
yeah.
But that's
For
a perfect
sure.
analogy because of how we do it. And just for anyone listening, our group holds what we call guest speaker series events. And so we hold 3 to 4 of those a year at the Hollywood Post 43. That's
And
the
that's
American
what we were
Legion.
We saw John Voight.
Yes,
speak.
right.
It was wonderful.
Stanley came in.
Oh,
So,
rest in
and
peace.
Stanley was a member of VME and that particular post. He joined that post with me.
Yeah.
So I knew him for many, many years. But so we've also had great names like Gail Ann Hurd, who co-wrote the first Terminator,
Yes,
right? Runs the
yeah,
Terminator franchise.
absolutely.
She's a great friend to vets. Tom DeSanto did the X-Men projects, another one that's come out and spoken. Bruce Cohen. Joe Quesada, I'm trying to get him. He's the
Oh,
who
Will,
wouldn't
did
love
you see
Joe.
him? So,
I did, but there was a sea of people between us last
So
week.
Karen and I were at the Stan Lee celebration last week that took place at Man's Chinese. Or is that Man's Chinese anymore? Is it still Man's?
Chinese
It's just
Man Theater,
TCL,
actually. Yeah,
TCL,
TCL,
yeah.
yeah.
It's all. It always be Man's Chinese to me, even though I was never there when it calls Man's Chinese. And it was a lovely night. Quesada was there.
Yes.
And did you have a chance to corner him?
I did not. I couldn't get through because we did so many military things. I was trying to get down to the. We were asked, we being VME, to celebrate Stan since he was a member. So we presented God on flags and stuff to the partners and business partners who put that together as a show of appreciation for everyone coming together to honor one of ours. Because Stan Lee was a World War II veteran and Army, I might add.
Right. And you are a massive comic book expert and fan and.
I'm a geek for sure.
Yeah, and so many of the the building blocks of comic books were built by veterans. Built by the very guys we were talking about that went to, just like the directors went to serve in World War II. Will Eisner Will Eisner used to do the military brochures, and Kirby, I believe, did military brochures, or like the pamphlets did instruct people how to do stuff.
Right.
And so many, just the Stan Lee served. All these guys served in World War II, and then they came back and were like, yeah, let's draw comics.
Right.
And that's why Kubert,
It was the best way for, to get a message out to the GIs. So whether it was like, this is why we fight, drawn in a panel, or hey, this is how not to get an STD.
Massively important.
Which was very important
up.
back then.
Yeah.
It's really how they communicated to these young guys who, you have to imagine at that time they were 17, 18, 19 years old, doing
And
some incredible things.
In a world of not at all to say they were less intelligent people, but the world was not as information ready as it is
there
today.
Was no
so
internet.
There wasn't as much just free flowing information.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's right.
The guys that were going over there, they didn't have as large a scope of the world, and so it was a huge importance.
And I think
to
I read
some of those things that maybe like today, because they're like, yeah, of course I know about blah, 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 blah. I was like, no, a lot of these guys were. You just hadn't had the life experience or hadn't had the world knowledge. I also think like the way that, we do it now with the young soldiers where we make videos and we make, because, these, especially young kids, like the world is changing. And so they're faster and they need, we use VR for a lot of stuff. Back then, it was so important to get in, whether it was a panel or get in a graphic novel, the information that they needed. Why are you fighting? This is how you put your weapon together. And it was critically important for those young guys to get information. That's how they did it. And they needed to do it fast.
Yes.
Because they were getting drafted and sent over there super fast. Like, I'm not sure what the traditional time is today, but
it's still fast today, but
fast?
it's not as fast as
it's not like it's not like they needed to get people over on the front line.
Correct.
Like, tomorrow.
Right.
Correct. And we have to remember in that day and age, I think the number is like 90% of the soldiers, sailors, airmen all came from agricultural communities. Right. Yeah. So they're really far out and spread. And they would enlist or form up in groups as neighbors because they hadn't really created the draft as you go and you just randomly picked. But you like all three of us, because we're all in a neighborhood right now, this room, right? We could all be drafted together and go off in the same unit. So it's all very different. But the stuff that Stanley did and Joe and all those, as far as Stanley had the military occupational specialty number of Army playwright. And there was only about 9 people.
Wow.
Well, and so he was actually put in the Signal Corps, which was your corps.
Yeah, and he was, like I said, I don't know him. Karen has known him since she was 8. I think,
Yeah, I kept him from her just for the sake.
But I would say, like, anyone who spoke about him, like, he was just such a humble guy and would say, like, hey, I didn't do much while I was over there, but what he did was, I truly do think that filmmaking and storytelling, which is what he did, was so important to having deployed to Afghanistan and being in the middle of nowhere, having just one piece of you that can kind of take your mind off what you're doing day to day or keep your mind off the war was so critically important, I think. And so, when people talk about, and I've had, I grew up on baseball cards and comic books. But when people trivialize what it does, it's really important. It's critically important. I think.
Absolutely. Now, when you were at service, I've contributed to some, like, give comics to vets. Send boxes of comics over and stuff. Did you would you guys get comics over?
Oh yeah, we'd get the
well,
great
thank
thing.
you.
Yeah,
Right.
thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Actually, we should give a shout out to our very good friend of the show, Jason Inman, who he served, and every year he does a
that's awesome.
Comics for Vets drive around the fall. They call it the Jawin. That's his online persona. Jawin Comics Drive, and we've talked about it a little bit on the show. And so every
we
year,
want to support that.
Okay, so we're going to get you guys connected with Jason.
Oh, that's
and
great.
he's delightful. Yeah, so he raises he got like 6,000 books or it was a crazy high number. Yeah,
right.
And we do it through the Wounded Warriors program.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah, there's not a lot of like I said, especially if you're injured, and you are held up in a hospital, whether it's Germany or what have you. There's not a lot of libraries that you can go to.
Yeah.
So having that something to read and take your mind off something is just so important. But I think I think people sometimes don't really consider like what having storytelling has been here since the dawn of man, and how important and it's I think why storytelling is so organic to people is because when you read it as a kid, you process it, you know what a good story is, and you just don't know how to define, like, okay, this is the first act, this is the second act. So.
Comic books were the first printed stories ever. Cave paintings or comic books. Without captions. Cave paintings are literal comic books. That's the old concept. You could do it. The silent issue, Larry Hama's G.I. Joe number 21, silent issue was done without any captions or word balloons or, I think it was all silent. That was the gag of the series. Yeah, it's the most, absolutely considered the most popular Joe book of all time, but it's one of the landmarks of the 80s. Details Snake Eyes breaking into a castle to free Scarlet and whatever. That's a cave painting.
Yeah.
There's no difference between what Larry put on the page there and what someone drawing like a big giant bear with arrows sticking out of it, like stay away from this thing. It's a creature. Warning to people who come along next.
I think they found the bubbles now.
Yeah. Well, this was pre-computers. So the real reason they don't tell you is they couldn't afford a letterer then. Marvel sales had dipped. No, and it's cave painting. It goes back to the primal urges. So when people are like, "Oh, comics are kid stuff," or comics, no. It's a language of communication that is as primal as anything. It's more intrinsic than us taking the sounds that come out of our mouths, forming that into an agreed upon language, and then agreeing upon tenses and articles and pronouns, and those are so many steps that we agree to when we form a language. Versus, I'm going to draw you a picture of a giant fire and then a drawing of you being burned by it and in pain. You get what I'm saying.
Right.
Don't
You're pointing to Rebecca when you say that, right? Not to me. Right.
Well, you know what I mean? You get what I'm saying. You get it. Like intrinsically, I understand what you're trying to convey. That's easier than language.
Yeah.
It's way easier than
Right.
language.
It's visual.
It's visual.
And it's the art of visual storytelling
inherent,
is so extraordinary in the comic books. And so I'm a comic book geek. I have thousands of comics in cold storage.
Yeah.
And I love it. And we were talking about that before this started. I freaking love comic books. And what I love is the chances they take. For example, the silent issue you just talked about. And the constant, I remember in, it was early 80s when I suddenly realized the difference between the illustrators, the writers, the importance of inking, lettering, and it's instead of coming to you as a whole form, you start breaking it down, because when you're a kid, you're just absorbing it, and the story's great, I love it.
One person did this whole thing. Oh my God, amazing! I don't know who these other 6 people are on this page.
Totally.
This was all done by Chris Claremont.
Right, exactly. And when you're a kid, you're so excited. And I have 2 older brothers.
Actually, wait, no. It would have been all done by Stan Lee because it said Stan Lee presents.
That's right. And you believe it, right?
Yes.
And then you start bringing, but my older brothers and I, we couldn't wait to go to my grandma's house once a month and walk down the street to Empire Comics. This is This is in Rochester, New York. And we would get our different comics. We all had our different areas that we wanted to pursue in collecting. And so my brother David loved G.I. Joe. My brother Todd was all about Thor and more of those characters. And I was a Silver Surfer fan.
Love it.
And anything I could read for a girl fan. And it was hard, right? Because there weren't a lot of girl characters in the
and
right?
Silver Surfer spoke more to the emotion, not to like stereotype. Girls are about emotion. But I absolutely can see that appealing, because his was more about that inner angst and really that, like, I don't have a place in this world. What do I do? How do I struggle? How do I get out of this? Which I think is something that women, minorities, people who had to overcome various social, kind of like Rebecca, like the military things you guys were talking about. That speaks to the Silver Surfer all day long. All
day long. And I loved his character because I wanted his power the power cosmic. That was my dream to have that, because it was the power to, you could kick butt whenever you needed to and heal. Right.
Yeah,
so I thought that's the perfect twin power. So I could really kick my brother's butt, and then before mom gets home, heal them. Right.
And hang 10.
But I began to appreciate the different, through the comic book world, the different ways of telling stories. Like we were talking about Walter Simonson.
Oh, yeah.
Mind-blowing, that series on Thor.
The best.
Right?
The best.
It's life-changing when you read something like that.
Yes.
And you become so excited about stories and the way the information is visually laid out. And I, as a young girl, I was always a fan of John Romita Sr. And then John Romita Jr., who I think are the most fabulous men and great role models.
Awesome.
He is. And he's always, by the way, supporting our group.
Great.
Sending art here and there for auctioning, for
That's great.
Events. So big shout out to them.
I met him
the Romita
when I was
family.
real young, Junior. I don't believe I ever met his dad. But I met Junior when I was a real young kid. And even as a young kid, I got this super friendly, like this guy's all right vibe. Like he gave me a Punisher sketch on
absolutely.
a Punisher hat I had,
Yeah.
and for no, it was just like we walked away going like, I like that guy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
You know, and-
he's got charisma. He's a salt of the
Yeah.
earth, and he really passionately cares. So
And his art's amazing.
oh,
His art's
great.
dynamite.
And he and his father both developed this tremendous, very different but very beautifully impacting stories, and
I mean, his
I'm
dad
grateful to them.
drew the most beautiful women in comics came
They
from
did.
Johnny Senior's
Yeah.
Jazzy Johnny's
Yeah.
pen. Like
Yeah.
the most beautiful women in comic books. Like that's it.
Yeah. Good people. And then as you grow up, you appreciate Will Eisner and different kinds
Yeah.
of, Chris Claremont you're talking
Yeah,
about.
oh yeah.
And Roy Thomas, who didn't have the Conans.
Roy
right?
Thomas is great, man. He's like I love the torch that he still carries. Like keeping the World War II stuff alive and keeping like the vintage Golden Age stuff alive with Alter Ego.
And he has been a friend for a long time. And he is he's not only carrying that, like you said, the torch forward and keeping all these different comic book history geeks like us informed, but he's one of the most accessible guys ever.
Yeah.
And he and Dan welcomed me into their world and just taught me a lot about comics. I'm grateful to them. So the comic world really is a family. And now it's different because now it's become, through the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right, and the Marvel television, it's become honestly a global family, right? We used to be just us at San Diego Comic-Con or New York Convention or like you were saying, Chicago Convention. And women weren't a huge part of that fan base. And I remember when Stan Lee saw me, he was like a girl fan and gave me something signed.
yeah.
And that's how the magic started. Because then
great.
I wrote him a thank you and then they send you a thank you back. And before you know it.
I did not do any kind of. I couldn't barely pen pal my buddy who moved to Arizona. That is one of the genuine regrets for me being a kid is that I didn't pen pal because I would read the letter columns. I would read them extensively.
Yeah.
I wasn't done reading the comic until I finished all the letter columns.
Yeah.
Right.
And I wish I had done that.
Yeah.
I know that it would have. I know that it would have.
They
sent my
always
life in
responded.
another direction. Yes.
And it does. And I have
you
to
ever get a
say
no
my
prize?
mom. Oh yeah. So
got a no prize?
I've got a no. Oh no, I didn't get a no prize. Sorry,
oh.
I got notes back.
Oh,
Sorry, I
okay.
misheard you.
Yeah.
But Virginia Ramita, that's how
Yeah.
wonderful woman. But my mom, also Virginia, deserves full credit because she would always have us kids write thank yous when we receive things. And
That's
so
great.
some of the guys would be like, kids want things, but they never say thank you.
Yeah.
And I just remembered that.
That's so-
try to
that's-
carry that through life. That's why I always try to thank people who have helped me along the way. And
Well, speaking about going global, VME is not just in LA though. We need to be clear here.
Oh no.
You guys.
So we have, it started with a couple of vets meeting in the basement of the American Legion 6 years ago, something like that, and has grown to over 3,400 veterans. We have chapters in New York and DC, Atlanta. A majority of our members are here in LA because obviously this is where the industry is.
Yeah.
But we have a map actually on our website if you want to check it out. But like I'll look and I'm like, okay, who's in Dubai? We actually have a writer friend of ours who is in Dubai because her husband is actually in the military. So
that's Jackie Perez.
yeah.
Let's give her a shout out.
Yeah,
Jackie
yeah,
Perez.
Jackie.
She's
what's,
actually
what's up, Dubai?
she's a Navy officer, and she got out and pursued her writing film, and she got one of the Stephen King dollar babies. So the Stephen King,
where he lets you license something
us,
for a
right?
buck, yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh,
she
wow.
qualified to get that, and she
What?
just finished a short that'll be coming out later this year.
What's the story? Do you know?
So it's Beach World. So
Okay.
it's a short little form.
Well, that's
but,
so cool.
And that's what's wonderful. And she also helped write grants for our group. What's wonderful is people like Rebecca and Jackie and Tom McCaffrey. There's so many veterans that step up to help each other. And so what happened is that our group started 6 years ago in the basement of the Legion. And it was really just focused on monthly meetings where vets just get together in a networking way. And then after a couple of years of that, we said, let's rebrand to be Veterans and Media Entertainment because we wanted to include comic books, gaming, all these other things, and formalize job and internship programs. So instead of just being a networking event, let's help vets get the work.
Great.
Yeah.
So important.
And
it's so important.
I think last year we had, thanks to Barbara Otan, West Pointer, two tours in Iraq. She volunteers and runs the internship program. We have 35 of our members got paid internships at HBO in development, on studios, CBS, Lionsgate.
That's great.
Yep, all of those.
It's funny. So when we were at the meet and greet that you guys invited us to, within the next few months, we were just hanging out watching TV, and we saw multiple people and commercials.
Right,
that we had met or saw at the meeting, and we were like, hey, why does that person look familiar? Oh, they were at the thing. They were at this, and it wasn't necessarily like for vet stuff. It was for this or for that.
Yeah.
Or for this.
Right.
And it means you guys are doing, and that's just in front of the camera.
Right.
Because the majority of the work is going to be behind the camera
That's
and
right.
post and stuff.
Yeah.
That's our casting project that's run by two Navy people.
Yeah.
Alan Petrozewski and Jennifer
Sorry,
Marshall.
Navy, what's that?
Yeah. So you can edit this portion out. No, they're great people. But so we had
Called
100 of our...
pandering to the audience.
We're just trying to be nice. Yeah. Over 100 of our members got landed different positions.
Yeah, I mean, and on our
Last year
different
through them.
shows, whether it's
SEAL Team, Hawaii
Team,
5-0.
Hawaii 5-0. We have Tom McCaffrey, who's vice chair of our board, landed an awesome role in the Menendez Brothers, which I think is a NBC. It was an NBC show.
Michael Broderick
Michael
on Power.
Broderick on Power, and
He's a
currently
Marine.
Oh, wow.
Great guy.
Yeah, currently on a.
He's doing so much.
Yeah,
he's
he's
always
doing a ton.
busy. But what's great about some of these people, and John Huertas, who's an Air Force vet, he's a senior member of our group, and he's on the show called This Is Us on NBC,
Yeah.
and before that he was in Castle as a regular, and then
that's
he was
great.
in Generation Kill. So a lot of these more senior members, like TJ Brady, we mentioned earlier, that helped Rebecca get a shadow project on Shooter because he was a writer on it. He was also a writer on Narcos, that little show.
Oh, yeah, that show's great.
All our senior members are trying to find the next generation that they can mentor.
It's important.
It's really about, like, I don't
it's
think
community.
I don't think you ever give up service when you leave the military, and so I think it's just them passing on, helping mentor and just trying to be of service to other veterans.
That's awesome. Well, listeners, if you guys want to find out more about VME, you find them on Twitter at VME Connect. And what's the website?
VMEconnect.org.
ORG.
Right.
Please check them out. I know a lot of my listeners are, you guys are military yourselves. I know a lot of you are creatives. You know people that are creatives. You know people that have served. And even if you don't, you just want to support them. You guys probably do events and things like that.
Right. So we have events. We hold over 50 classes a year.
Oh,
and we're
yeah.
not trying to be
It's all
film
on our
school.
website, too.
Yeah, it's
I
not a
know.
film school, but it's a networking group.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Helping each other connect.
Yeah,
That's
it's really
simple.
great. So please, guys, check out VME. And while you're on the internet, make sure you check Joe on Joe out at Joe on Joe Pod. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com. Tell me, Joe, I've listened to every single episode of your podcast. What are you going to do next? The answer is to keep me in your feed, guys, because while this is the last episode of the cartoon that we're doing, we will continue to do the G.I. Joe Joe on Joe illustrated episodes that are through our Patreon. Go to patreon.com/joeonjoepod. See how you can help support the show and listen to all the exclusive illustrated episodes. Those are where we apply this kind of detail to the comic books. We go page by page, panel by panel, break it down, art styles, history of books, things like that. That's going to still continue every 5th episode to be released on this main feed. So if you're listening to this, you got this in your podcast catcher, do not let go of the Joe on Joe show, because we will be around. It just may not be as frequently as weekly, because I've got a life, Karen.
I forbid that.
Yeah,
We love
Rebecca,
Joe on
There's
Joe.
another Rebecca in my life that I need to devote time to. And yeah, and I'm very excited for this next chapter. So stay tuned to the Joe and Joe channel. Details are always forthcoming. And let me think. When this you know what? Speaking along those lines, this releases the week before Long Beach Comic Expo. Right. Joe and Joe, just in time for my quote unquote final episode. Let's have a panel at a Comic-Con to promote the show that is then going off the air. Where I'm doing a panel, guys. So if you're listening to this and you are in the LA area, you're going to head over to Long Beach Comic Expo. Coming out, we're talking about G.I. Joe fandom in all its shapes and forms: cosplaying, action figure collecting, comic book collecting, cartoon, the movies, however you approach G.I. Joe and however you're a fan of G.I. Joe. That's what we're going to be talking about and celebrating. So you guys come out. We're going to talk to the people in the crowd. I'm going to have a few of my friends up on the dais. We're going to talk about G.I. Joe. It's going to be great from a fan's perspective.
Thank you for everything you do to keep that culture alive on Joe, and also to be so inclusive of us.
Yeah.
Oh.
You know, not just your fans, but also your veteran fans like us. I love it.
Well,
we appreciate it. I know your grandfather served as well.
Yes. Yeah. My
And-
grandpa was in the Army in World War II in South America. I was a mechanic.
Nice.
It's so great. And that's where, in our connection, our vets groups want to support you too.
Mm-hmm.
And we also feel really proud of what you're doing, because I actually, when we're done with this, I can't wait to ask you some other stuff.
Oh my God, that's a tease, but not for
That's
you,
right.
listener. And so before we talk more, Joe, let's listen to our sponsor, the Dreamer Comics Podcast. Joe and Joe listeners know that I love comic books, G.I. Joe, pop culture, and my wife and dogs are pretty great too. I also love learning how people get to where they're at and where they're going. All of that comes together over at the Dreamer Comics podcast, except for my family stuff. That'd be really weird. Omar Spahi interviews someone from the comic industry every episode, and they break down the journey that creator took to get from reading comics to creating them. Comic luminaries like Jim Valentino, Ross Ritchie, Kyle Higgins, and so many more can be found at DreamerComicsPodcast.com or find them anywhere you get your podcasts. Everyone has a dream. Learn how to make yours a reality. And so with all this comic talk, guys, you need to be listening to Dreamer Comics Podcast because Omar will break it down, and he's got all the industry connections and absolutely going to give you insight how you can break into the industry. So give that a listen. So real quick, because I love this conversation. I could talk for another half hour, but real quick before we start this episode, which is called, ladies and gentlemen, The Legend of Metalhead. That's right, 2 weeks in a row. I'm a little upset with my listeners because you guys did not tell me that the final 2 were clip shows. Last week, I was disappointed that we had a clip show, but I thought they can't do 2 clip shows in a row. And then I sat down.
Yes, they can.
And yes, they can. The Legend of Metalhead is another clip show. Although I will say this, though, it is a more coherent clip show than Basic Training. It is still a clip show. So we're gonna talk more with you guys over the episode because there's not much of a narrative to follow along in the episode. Although we will do our best. But what is your connection to G.I. Joe specifically? Karen, what was your exposure to G.I. Joe? Any at all?
So my brother's favorite thing was playing with G.I. Joe, the little action figures, and we had like endless battles in the backyard. And I grew up with all of this. So that's my G.I. Joe connection. I would also say on a project that Rebecca and I did called War Inc. with 2 other gentlemen.
Talk about that.
This was combat veterans telling their stories through their tattoos. We were interviewing them and photographing them. And every time we would ask someone...
I would say about half of the people said that they joined the military because of G.I. Joe.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, well, I can't. We're going to talk about more during the episode.
So that's what I'm saying. G.I. Joe and Captain America.
Oh,
right?
Caps.
It influenced them.
Yep.
You know, it really did.
And Rebecca, what about you?
Same thing. I think when you grow up in a certain generation, that the cartoons you watched were G.I. Joe. That's like old school. So I'm dating myself a little bit. But I don't. I'm interested to see this because I have not seen one of these episodes, so I'm really excited about it. And
Well, you're one of us.
yeah.
I've watched this already. Oh boy.
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited to see it. But I've had a lot of soldiers in the military, and I would say probably about half of them were inspired by G.I. Joe to join. So
I love it.
it's either that or Rambo.
Well, yeah. You drew first blood. Nothing is over. Nothing. That's my final word to say on Joe and Joe. Even though this is quote unquote the final episode. Nothing is over. Nothing.
Especially in Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, listeners, get your DVDs ready. It's season 2, disc 3 of the DIC episodes, The Legend of Metalhead. Karen Kraft, Rebecca Murga. I really love having you guys on. I can't wait to watch this episode with you. Are you guys ready to go?
We're ready. Let's do it.
Listeners, and here we go. So you're saying your brother would be Metalhead? Is that what you're saying? So the show starts with, here's this. It's reused, repurposed footage.
Oh, my God.
This
Look
is
at that.
Right.
This is old school.
Yeah, repurposed footage.
This is not old school.
And Metalhead, who is my least favorite Cobra of all time because he is obnoxious, and that's him. And it's him narrating this thing. And these are all clips from a previous adventure that they had where Cobra was using the sonics from this rock and roll band that Metalhead had to do sonic weapons, right? Yeah. So this is entirely repurposed footage. And I don't,
I'm just laughing because talk about memory lane.
Wow.
Right? Talk about flashbacks.
Talk about firing a missile at your leader. Okay? That's what we're talking about. So that's Metalhead.
Yeah.
He was the Cobra missile. This generation is like missile guy. Previously, Scrap Iron would have been one of their missile guys. And his deal was he shot a missile when to shoot it, he had a vocal trigger mechanism. So he would yell bang in order to fire it. So what does that translate to? On the show, you just get him going bang, bang all the time. And it's infuriating.
This guy looks like my dad when he's listening to loud music right there.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
No, yeah.
Say that again.
He just looked like my father when he took me out. Honestly, I feel like I've just woken up on a Saturday morning, and around this time, my mom would come in cleaning, telling us to clean.
Yeah, so was this, now there's two generations. There's the Sunbow stuff, which is I think what people traditionally consider the G.I. Joe stuff.
Yeah.
Like that was mid 80s. Then this is the DIC era, which is the very early 90s.
Yeah.
Does any of this look familiar to you?
Some of it does because, well, actually, I should say I only caught little pieces of this, right?
Yeah,
Just because
sure.
it's natural. I think it was Dungeons and Dragons had that show at the same time.
Yeah.
So
that was a great show.
Right? And I was always looking for it. It was a half hour, and then this would be around that same time. So, yes. And anything G.I. Joe, obviously,
And of
taking a
course,
look at.
the weaponry and vehicles are 100% accurate to what you guys used in the Army, right?
100%.
I mean,
Actually, that's exactly what the Humvees look like right now. And I think
See,
I
that's-
actually have that. That was an
Rapid
issue.
fire
That was an
missiles
issue
like that,
weapon
yeah.
to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love to go around on reserve drill, bang!
Yeah.
And then off we
The
go.
Legend of Metalhead, written by Phil Harnage. So I'm assuming I don't mean shade on you, Phil, but I'm assuming that's just the voiceovers. It's got to just be the voiceover that Phil wrote here, because everything else. But here's the question though, and this will be one if we end up
Here's
getting,
Airborne guy. Airborne
if we end
guy.
up getting a chance to talk to Chuck Patton at Long Beach this weekend, is on a clip show like this, did Phil have influence on what clips were used? You know what I mean? Like, so was he part of the editing process, or did they say, hey, we're going to do this, this, and this, and then here you go write
Right.
the
I wonder if he did the Marvel bullpen process, right? Where he wrote out some just general beats, right, with the editor. The editor grabbed this, and then you go
Yeah.
back through.
Yeah.
Right?
Does he
Well, if he did
sing
it
the
the
whole
DC,
time?
if they did it the DC, they did the DC method at the time. They would have just said, put a gorilla on the cover and it'll sell 10 more copies.
Yeah.
Does he sing the whole time, or is this...
I mean, he was singing. This episode had him singing in a band, and that music, the rock music that generated, was causing all this devastation, right? So the more famous music from G.I. Joe was Cobra's
Yes.
gang called the Dreadnoks.
Yes.
They had a band called Cold Slither.
Yeah. It's a better name, by the way.
And
like that name.
I'm actually being legit here. It's an awesome, hooky, catchy
Yeah.
song.
Yeah.
Cold Slither,
Oh,
they'll be
that's what I
coming
remember.
for you. A band of vipers. Like it was great. And
Yeah.
their episode, like, their thing was, it was like hypnotic suggestions with the crowd. Really, really well done music. So now this stuff is from an episode where
It's like C-3PO there.
Yeah, well, he's
that
a
guy's-
robot.
That guy's
Right.
broken.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it was a
That guy's
robot.
done.
That's the C-3PO scene.
This,
Remember
they're
his
like,
arms?
we need another guy.
exactly, and he gets rebuilt into a thing called the Eliminator. So it's like the Terminator gets an upgrade, basically.
the Eliminator.
Give me a break. You're the same old overkill.
Over, exactly. And so then he felt like he wasn't measuring up to what Overkill did. And so then it was a competition between Overkill, who is a robot, and Metalhead, who is a moron.
He shouldn't have
Wow.
stood underneath all those icicles.
Yeah,
No,
that was
bad.
That was a
set up.
bad idea.
Bad. You got to be a better villain
Well,
than that.
honestly, I blame the structural engineers of Cobra. Like, you're setting up this inside an ice base, and you're leaving all these easily crushable structures. There's a lot going on here,
I have a
guys.
question here.
Yeah.
The animation here, doesn't it feel like He-Man and Skeletor going at work?
Is that what
It's not
reminds me of?
it's not very fluid.
Right.
It's definitely a different company, but you're not wrong there. There
Yeah.
was a lot of the similar techniques used for budgetary purposes. So Filmation was He-Man, and that was Lou Scheimer's company, and they were based out of California, and they worked very hard to keep the money here
Yeah.
and not ship it overseas.
Good for
So
them.
yeah, so to
Let's
do
give a
that
shout
though,
out.
you get this kind of animation, which is more. It's not as many motions per frame, you know, like,
Right.
and not
Well-
as many things happening. There's not as many frames per second, so things are a little slower and chunkier in movement. A lot of repeated backgrounds. The Sunbow stuff, they had a bigger budget, and it was animated overseas.
Oh,
They
this
used
is-
some of the more anime, like Japanese style.
Right.
So it looked a little more polished in that regard.
This is a military show because they have the weights already. So
So
yeah, they're
this
already
must
in the
be
gym.
they're already in
Look
the
at this.
gym
and eating,
and they're getting food.
well,
Oh,
so
look at
let's
this.
It's a chow hall.
Okay, so what's the military like gym regimen like? Is it like gym every day, or is that a major part of being an
Well,
athlete?
Well,
Physical fitness.
it's physical fitness. So like if you go on mission, you come back, you lift some dumbbells, you drink some juice like that guy.
Well, actually, Rebecca, you were attached to Navy SEALs in Afghanistan,
Yeah,
right?
actually,
Talk about that right here.
I tell you what, they it's just a part of your life because you don't have time to, like, as we know it, get dressed up in your gym clothes and go out. So you come back from mission and you just like lift weights or you do squats or that it actually looks just like that because it's usually just a barbell and I've seen some of most terrible gyms in
Yeah.
Afghanistan.
Yeah.
We got our treadmill working here. They're skateboarding, so they're trying to be
And
super cool.
Does the Army or or
Look at this.
whatever branch,
Look, right here we
do
go.
they give you guys specific workouts to do, like to stay safe? Like we had when I played high school football,
Yeah.
and when we did, they said here's a running regimen that you follow this and do this every day, and
No,
or
I
where
think-
they leave it to your own
Yeah,
devices.
I think when you're back here in the States, like there's PT in the mornings, you get up at 5 and,
Yeah.
and there's like a regimen at PT. But when you're like in the middle of a war, specifically if you're living out in a village, there's no, it's on you as a person, as a leader, to stay in shape. And to be honest with you, that you're more motivated because you obviously want to be physically fit in case something breaks out. And when you look at films like Black Hawk Down, where these guys had to run, the last like 5 or 6 miles just after having this, this almost 52-hour battle, or how many hours? 18-hour battle.
Yeah.
To have to run all the way back is, you have to be physically fit. So.
I played paintball and had too much adrenaline surging, where I've literally tripped over my own feet because I was running for paintball. I cannot imagine doing that in real time, in real life, like in a very non-pandering real way. It's funny you mentioned Black Hawk Down, because one of the projects that you ladies are working on is a project that is called 765.
Right.
Tell me about that.
So
Actually, when we come back from this commercial.
Okay.
Today's file card feature is on the alien destroyer, codenamed Carcass. His birthplace is Quadrant 4 and the planet Mertonia. And his primary military specialty is a mercenary hunter. His secondary military specialty is both planetary and alien destruction. Leaving nothing but broken bones and smashed dwellings in his wake, Carcass is a born menace to the universe. He has stomped through alien towns, destroying all that he can and making prisoners of its fearful inhabitants. He's also gone so far as to mistakenly attack a Star Brigade outpost, narrowly escaping capture by ducking into an asteroid belt. His mutated body, which may account for his overly hostile attitude, is considered ugly even to other lunatics aliens more hideous than he. I had to do it, guys. I said, let's jump to the end of the line and see what crazy character have I not covered. What's the most oddball thing? And there's no one else but Carcass. Carcass looks like the alien hunter from the movie The Last Starfighter. And I would not be surprised if he was somewhat modeled on that, because also in the Star Brigade is the Predacon guy, which is kind of based off the Predator, who's also into arm wrestling. It's the Death Knell. I mean, this is the shark that G.I. Joe jumps over. I don't necessarily hate him as a concept, but this is really a stretch for a G.I. Joe character. And even the production value of it, it doesn't look like there's like one paint application from what I can see on the white teeth, and the rest is just the molded orange plastic. Yeah, this guy's weird. I know there's got to be fans of Carcass out there. There's got to be fans of the whole Star Brigade, which, maybe in a future iteration of the show we'll dig more into it. I needed to jump to this and just to say, Carcass of the Lunatics Empire, we salute you. So 765, tell us about that.
765 is written by Steve Newman, who is a Special Forces Green Beret. He got out after 25 years, close to 25 years of service, and pursued writing as a passion. He joined our group, VME, and we have what we call Pitch Fest once a year with Lionsgate's Grindstone Group. And he was selected to come pitch this idea, and then we started collaborating the last 3 years. It's based on a true story of a battle of special forces in 2006 Afghanistan. And the story is how they survived an ambush, not just for, say, 13 hours like in Benghazi or a day in Black Hawk Down. And those are pretty brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, all of them extraordinary. There's no comparison to the battle size, but just in length. 765 guys were out there for a little over 50 hours.
Wow.
For a lot of reasons.
Whoa.
None of them good. But so it's a true story of how they figured out to how they could survive. And it's very powerful. And it's been a wonderful journey to get to know those soldiers that were involved in that. And one of the widows, Tara, a friend of ours, giving their insight. And Tara was actually She was deployed at the same time in Afghanistan as her husband, who was in this group.
Wow.
And,
Is that? I thought there were rules around that, like about. Or is it only if you have
Different
kids
units.
or
different units.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's a Green Beret, and then she was in
Interesting.
military intel. And
And you're correct. If you had children, you have to have like a plan of who's going to watch the children. But they were fresh married.
Because our friend who's been a guest on the show, our friend Paul Vieira, he and his wife are both active military, and they switch off and on. So he
Right.
just came back home for a few months, and she's now deployed for 3-4
telling you,
months.
I
or
don't
something
know
like that.
how these families keep doing it.
Man,
Wow, it is.
It's a hustle, but then you hear him talk about how rewarding it is, and just like then they get the dedicated time with the kids, and it's just
So proud of those
Yeah.
people. I mean, they really are making sacrifices. So that's the feature film. So it's to tell that particular story,
yeah.
and how they worked with their Afghan partners, and a lot of people figuring out how to come and do the rescue.
That's wild. So what stage of is that project at right
We're
now?
doing the rewrite right now, and we're hoping to be in production at the end of the year.
It's great.
So very excited. Thank
Very
you.
excited.
Yeah,
Very excited.
really
I'm okay. Listen, I'm happy to play one of the soldiers.
Right. Let's get
saying.
you in there.
Just
Let's
saying.
get you in
I'm
there.
Happy.
Right.
Happy to play one of the soldiers. I'm just fine. I'll join SAG. It'll happen.
Yeah, it'll definitely.
Yeah, but that's not the only
We'll get you to
project
the
that you
gym.
guys have in the work, because you wait. You're saying I got to go to the gym? What do you?
I didn't mean it like that.
Oh.
What you should see is, hey,
I just lost a bunch of weight.
and you're looking great. You're on your way.
No.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You guys are working on some other things. You've got a project. We talked earlier about War Inc. We're going to wrap up with that. But something called Captive, Rebecca, you're working on something called Captive?
Yeah, so Captive is basically a short film and proof of concept for a feature film that's about, I got really involved in women's rights and in human rights when I was working in Iraq and Afghanistan, looking at what was happening to a lot of the women under the Taliban. And got even more so involved when I was coming back here, and my father's an immigrant, looking at what happens to women in particular in South America. And so the film is about child trafficking, but really it's about the heroes that help to get some of these young women and children back home. So it's about the true story of a couple of special operators who basically find women and return them home. But things happen along the way. So it's, really excited. It's sort of like Sicario meets Taken, I guess. And and we're working on it. We have a lot of veterans on set, so in different positions, whether they're producing or the writer is actually active military. Excuse me, she was active Army for a long time and currently working with the DoD. And super excited about it, and getting veterans on set in front of the camera and behind the camera as well.
And when you do that and you tell these stories like 765 and Captive and War Inc. that we're going to talk about, you're by enlisting veterans and people at all levels of the production, you're adding a quality of realism to it. You're adding in these unspoken fact checks to every step of the operation. So there's always a set of eyes on it to give it authenticity, to say that wouldn't happen, or that it's not just one person doing it. It's a whole cadre, a team of people that are adding realism and authenticity. I think that's really important in stories like this.
That's correct. And it's actually a chance for you to work with other veterans who have done incredible missions in service to country, and finding out that many of them yearn to continue to serve in some capacity, even as civilians, when you say, and to hear that they take up causes that both put them in the line of danger but have such meaningful return. So by saving these women and children, it's very powerful. And yes, it's authentic. But I'll have to say this. The one thing we learn about the military is no two soldiers' experiences are the same. So we have a baseline of experience, training, basic training, certain kind of education. But so many of our members are deployed to over 80 places around the world. They're all experiencing very different ways that training applies, and then the real world mission. So they come back. And it's interesting to see it's like a story, it has act 1, 2, and 3, but the way it's approached by everyone's different experiences and pulling them together and combining that, so it's definitely from a real world place and it's authentic, but it's also interesting to see veterans educating each other on their very different experiences and creating stuff. And the other lying humor is that I would say the most times that Rebecca and I have been interviewing a lot of these people for the film is that the military humor, that is universal. It doesn't matter. Actually, it doesn't matter what branch or what country you're from. Military humor seems to be like universal. Like as soon as you raise the right hand and you swear, and like, here's your humor book. You know what I mean? Like, you will tease each other, make fun of each other.
Yeah.
You know, and that's your way of expressing care and concern and love. Right.
Yeah,
It's a lot of fun.
Well, that's the camaraderie that you're talking about.
It is.
You know,
and it's part of also handling very, very heavy subjects. Or I did not have the experiences Rebecca did in the military, and she saw some very terrible things over in Iraq and Afghanistan. Having said that, I've been a documentary filmmaker, travel the world, and I saw equally terrible things that people are doing to each other on a daily basis in different countries. And so the humor is a way of coping with those heaviness.
Yeah.
It totally is.
no, it's gallows humor.
It is.
Yeah. And it's important. It's why first filmmaker that jumps to my mind like this, that a Tarantino film will deal with important dark stuff and then punch it with humor.
Love it.
And that's
exactly
that's
it.
the power of it,
Yep.
because you have these real things, and then you got to deflate it, let the air out of that moment with
Right.
whatever punchline you got.
Exactly.
Very important. Very important.
And that's life, right?
Yeah.
That's
Right.
life.
Yeah.
That's how we deal with it.
But I think
Which
military
is
guys,
also this episode, which is a serious look into the life of a military person, punctuated by a high school reunion. We'll be right back. Hey, listeners, if you're anything like me, all apologies to your family. I'm just kidding. It's likely that they made you this way. No, I'm talking about that I'm always looking for more G.I. Joe content, and I think I've found it. Stop what you're doing. Okay, don't stop listening to this podcast. Can't you multitask? And go to Facebook/Special Mission Force. Brian Wilkins is curating all kinds of wonderful, nostalgic G.I. Joe content, including new pics from his fantastic Instagram page at Special Mission Force. On his Instagram, he's taking photos of Joes out in the wild, in the real world, doing stuff. For me, the two things that stand out the most are his variety of characters that he takes pictures of, and like the depth of field in these pictures. It's just a wonderful job of directing focus for you. I think you really will enjoy his work. So like him on Facebook, follow him on Instagram and Twitter, and get ready for his website, specialmissionforce.com. He's a name to watch in the G.I. Joe game, so get on board now. Now back to the show. I mean, the seriousness of a global fight against international terrorists like Cobra needs to be punctuated by a high school reunion that you attend with your grandma from eastern Ukraine.
I love it. I just honestly want to sit and watch it, though. It's like...
right.
Well,
like-
listen,
look
I
at me.
never want to see this episode again, so you can have my DVD.
All right.
I
I want that hydroplane.
Yeah.
This is pretty
well,
cool stuff.
so what's great about this era is they really featured the toys to just a huge extent on this
So
iteration
is
of the
this the
cartoon.
90s?
This is
90s,
90s, like 91 or 92. My books are away from me
Yeah.
right now. But these, like those little helicopters, like that thing they were flying.
Yeah, I can
that
imagine.
that is the toy. That is
Yeah.
100%
I
the toy
remember
that you
all-
could
that's
have.
like
So
yeah.
he
Yeah, I
feels like a
remember all
Boba
this.
Fett knockoff in
Yeah,
that,
it's
right?
a little bit,
You know?
yeah,
A little bit. I love
mean,
the...
you can go back to even Destro, who's one of the first villains. Who I think Destro was like 84, I believe, was his first one. He had wrist rockets too, which was a little
Right.
bit from Boba Fett.
But he has a jetpack, like a because he can fly, right? Didn't I just see that?
I don't think he normally doesn't have a jetpack. I looked away for a sec. I'm not sure if he's flying, but you
I
know.
love the Cobra having
No,
the giant
those are more
screens.
missiles.
No, it's the other guy.
Oh, the other
guy.
guy. Yeah, that's like a
Yeah.
helicopter, like a personal helicopter
Yeah.
machine.
Right.
But if you picture that same size thing as a toy,
Yeah.
that was perfect because it fit right in your hand.
Yeah.
It had the whirly blades, and I believe
Yeah.
it spun fast enough to like give it a little bit of a lift before
Yeah.
it fell.
Oh, look at this kind of helmet.
That's
football
Captain
mask.
Gridiron.
Oh, he looks
He's
like
a
an
football
NCO I
player.
used to have.
He's a
Nailed it.
football
He
player,
looks
Well,
like
they're-
an NCO I used to have.
and it's all football puns.
Wow.
So he's like, "Come on, we gotta kick these Cobras through the goalpost.
Don't be punching like the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, we gotta get that first down and stop Cobra." Like it's
Got it.
all football.
I wonder who
puns.
he likes. I wonder who his team.
Probably
his team
Buffalo
is.
Bills.
Probably a
That's the
Bills
greatest
fan,
team.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, except the fridge was a GI Joe. We're gonna reiterate. So you know,
Oh, the fridge
the
was.
fridge was a GI member of GI Joe. You know what
right.
else? Fact for you, ladies: Rocky, the
Really?
boxer, was going to be a member of GI Joe.
Get
It
out.
was printed in an issue of the Marvel Comics Order of Battle comic
Yeah.
book, which was just profiles of all the heroes. And they thought they had the contract all signed, and they sent it to press, and it's printed, and it's Rocky Balboa, and it's the GI Joe
Wow.
boxing trainer. But then Rocky's people were like, "Nah, we're good."
I
for
would've
whatever
loved to
reason,
read
the
that.
deal fell
That would've
through.
been great.
Yeah, the deal fell through for whatever reason. So he is in this comic book, but then that's it. They never made a figure of him. They even made a Cobra. They started working on a Cobra boxing counterpart to him called Big Boa, Rocky Balboa.
Yeah.
Big
Oh,
Boa.
right.
And he's a boxing glove, and he comes with a boxing speed bag and things. But that he was supposed to be Rocky's counterpart, and then they never did Rocky. So you just have a random Cobra boxing instructor.
This guy he's wearing his beret. Look at him. It's
That's Lieutenant Falcon.
Yeah.
Perfectly
Lieutenant Falcon.
groomed beret.
Yeah. Oh, and the
And
other
it never
thing-
leaves his head.
Well, the other thing too with G.I. Joe is that whatever like lieutenant, colonel, captain, first sergeant,
Oh, this must be Air Force. We're looking at those tennis courts.
all those designations usually have no bearing on who reports to. You know what I mean? Because like they call him like Captain Gridiron, but he's not like running things.
Right.
He's still just a soldier, right? Everyone's like General Hawk is definitely the general, but then there's some notable
Yeah. Oh, look at
mistakes.
funny.
the flat top. Look at the flat top. That's great.
Yeah.
That kid got a good haircut.
Yeah.
I like the bullseye-ish.
Yeah, so he looks like Deadshot.
He does.
Mm-hmm.
Good call.
So now he's going to blow up a cafeteria truck in front of these children.
Well, Terminator 2 stole basically ideas from
Mm-hmm.
this.
Yeah. I'm just curious how he replenishes those missiles because he's throwing
Well,
them
they're
off.
never ending, Karen.
Yeah, it's like
yeah.
Legolas's quiver.
Karen.
Right. Oh, right.
Quiver never goes empty. What is it?
Yeah.
If his heart is pure, his quiver never goes empty, or something like that.
Oh, my
There's some rule
God.
like that, and yeah. This was when Cobra started a daycare.
Oh,
That's
right.
what this episode is from, and it's just best left forgotten. But let's talk.
I think we should not
let's talk
forget
about your documentary. We've teased it a little bit. It's called War Inc., and it's as you said earlier, it's about soldiers telling their story through the tattoos that they have.
Yeah, it's a super. We're excited about it. Super dope project that we got involved in a few years ago, and basically at that time it was a small grant given by some California organizations where we interviewed about 24 veterans, all from different experiences, medics and Navy, Army, all different branches, and took photographs of their tattoos because tattoos really are its own kind of subculture. People who get tattoos, and it's also a way of storytelling, right? When we go back to like what's the image and what's that image conveying on like your forearm or your back. And
Yeah.
you have a lot of people who have gotten memorial tattoos with soldiers who have died, and getting those names or a piece of their like one of the guys up there, Noah, who lost both of his legs when a Humvee he was blown up and Humvee rolled over on his legs, got his Converse sneakers tattooed onto his chest because he loved wearing Converse, and he had little wings as his legs were going up to heaven. So
Wow.
So yeah, it was really powerful. We met some amazing people, got some amazing friends up there, and right now we're working on we created a digital series on it, and we're going to be doing actually the LA version this year, so getting a bunch of Los Angeles veterans to do the same thing, and then creating a series and documentary out of that. So
That's I'm really excited to see the results of that. That sounds like it would just be a fascinating and heartbreaking story.
It's a lot of emotion in those.
Yeah,
projects,
you don't.
so-
You typically, it's like you don't get ink. Like I got a great tax return.
Let's ink it up.
Let me ink it. Like it's So I can only imagine that's
It
going to
runs
be an
the
emotional
gamut
journey.
to
Yeah.
what people decide to put on, like you said, from memorial to tattoos to totems,
Uh-huh.
or before people go to battle, after they come back.
Do you have
Some
any
of them-
tattoos on you?
I do not.
Do you have any tattoos,
that's
Rebecca?
the funniest
We get
thing
asked
is we get asked all the time because we produce the project,
Yeah.
and the answer is no. And it's not that I'm not open to tattoos; is that I never could decide on what I want.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Well, Jason and Chris, who started the project in Oakland, did, and through another veteran in our group, Veterans of Media Entertainment, introduced us to this, and we created this project jointly to encompass this docu-series that lives on the digital landscape. And so what we're trying to do is capture just this rich variety of tattoos, the coloring. It's amazing.
It's gotta be good, yeah.
And in the personal I mean, it's such a personal decision, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to wear this the rest of my life. Here
I
we
have
go.
I have one. I'm going to test your comic knowledge.
All right, do it.
Do you know what this is?
Oh,
my
I don't. It looks something very Marvel-like.
No.
My friends at
What is
Legion
it? I
of
don't
M
know.
would.
Ultra Boy from Legion of Superheroes.
Oh.
Wow.
Said
It's a
Legion.
deep- It is Legion.
I was trying
it's
to
a deep
figure
cut. It's a deep cut. It's a deep cut.
Wow.
Yeah.
So why? Why would you decide on that one?
I love the Legion, and I love the 5-year gap was a really important series for me that opened my eyes to storytelling possibilities with Keith Giffen and the way that he told the stories. And this was how they interpreted. They took the traditional costumes and they got rid of them, and they all wore kind of everyday outfits. And Ultra Boy's logo, which was this, it went from being on his chest to being a tattoo here. And I just always thought that was just a great way of him going, I'm taking what I was when I was a kid, because 5 years later they all became adults and they were no longer teenagers, and they had a different, more darker adventures. So it was like him saying, I'm going to take what I was when I was a teen and I'm going to carry it with me. And it's always going to be with me. I'm always going to be Ultra Boy. Ultra Boy, he's a great character. He's like the Han Solo of the Legion, kind of like that. So it always appealed to me. So, when we were teenagers, we got it like temporarily done like on spring break. And I was like, it looks good. And I didn't get it until I was 30. Wow. And my buddy was moving out of town. Matt, and Matt, who drummer on our theme song. He went and he was moving out of Chicago for a bit, so he went and got a Chicago tattoo on his forearm. And I'm like, I'll go with you. Yeah. And we knocked out Ultra Boy. Yeah. So that's the only ink I have.
I've debated it. Have you?
Getting a tattoo?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've gone into the parlor with my sister, and we just can't decide on what we want.
Rebecca Toilet-Teal, she has, when her mom passed, she has her mom's signature on her forearm now. It says she got it from a greeting card, like a birthday card she had it from her. So it says like love always, and then her mom's signature.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and she
so
just carries it with her.
beautiful.
They are, and they're so
really
personal.
Nice. Exactly.
Yeah.
I love the art form. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I was thinking about getting Excelsior. On her stand,
yeah.
And that came back last week because I love that man.
Yeah.
Don't we all?
Don't we all? Who doesn't? If you don't love Stan Lee, I don't know what's wrong with you.
And we love you, Joe.
Oh my gosh!
In fact, we have a little something to give you here.
What?
A little gift. It's a little time. So
Karen's taking out a coin, and if you know,
is this a challenge coin?
Yeah, it is a challenge coin. If you know what the military,
yes.
VME has its own challenge coin. On the front, it has the logo in black, and on the back, it has all the seals. From all the different branches, and says Veterans of Media Entertainment. So we just want to say thank you.
Oh my gosh!
Amazing!
I'm choking up. This is lovely.
You deserve it.
This is so wonderful. I love this.
Taking it. Yes.
So now there are rules, right? Do I have to carry this with me?
Yeah.
Well, you're
There
supposed
you
to, but the origination of the challenge coin was it signified like what unit you were a part of. And so, it's grown to, if you're in a bar at a unit, you can challenge each other. And usually who has the highest coin wins, and everyone should buy him a drink. But but for now, you can kind of just keep that on one of your many.
This is fantastic. Thank you.
Awesome.
This means so much to me. Thank you so
being
much.
here means so much to us, and what you do to carry on the culture that shaped and formed us all to make decisions. One of the things that I feel about comic books and even G.I. Joe, there was good versus evil, and sometimes. I understand that it can be a little too diametric, and we like the Punishers, if you will.
Yeah.
And stuff. But there is truly good, and truly there is some bad stuff out there. And we appreciate that you carry on the culture that helps instill the values of making the tough decision the right decision.
Wow.
And I really appreciate that. And if anyone else has the opportunity to see his studio, it's mad crazy with Star Wars. I'm looking at Walter Simonson's Thor.
You got Indiana Jones.
Hundreds of books.
You got
I may never leave. There's the Green Lantern.
It's insane. You got a record player, man.
Maybe we'll do a virtual
and two
Joe
dogs.
Joe tour.
2 dogs. It comes with dogs. The studio comes with dogs. This is actually beautiful.
This means this is crazy. This is great. I love this. This is absolutely great.
We love you too.
Oh
Thank
my
you
gosh.
for being great at your job and a great neighbor and friend.
I love it. And one final thing we have to do on this show, I ask all my guests, if you could be a member of Joe or Cobra, which would you be? And what would your specialty be? And then we'll come up with a name for you.
Okay.
So, Rebecca, we're going to start with you.
All right.
Would you want to be on the Joe or Cobra
Joe.
team? And there's no shame in being on a Cobra, by the way.
Nope, Joe.
Okay.
I'd rather be on the Joe
Got to be
team.
on Joe.
So Do I have to just make something up?
Well,
or-
what do you want to do? Usually that leads us to the best route. So you're going to be on Joe.
I think because I was a photographer in the military, I'd want to be like the camera person that like shoots all the stuff. So when they go back from mission, I'm like, Joe, maybe you should do it better this time.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So I want to be like the combat photographer.
Okay, you're the combat photographer.
Yeah,
That's perfect.
So what would that? Okay, good. Yay! I'm part of the team.
You're the combat photographer.
Yeah.
I feel like I got it. Your name is Lens Cap.
Boom.
Done.
Boom.
Whoa.
Boom.
Lens Cap. Welcome to the Joe and Joe team.
Yes, Lens Cap is here for your service.
Karen, what about you?
Wow, that's a tough one because I always got so annoyed with Cobra and thought this guy. I'm serious. This guy is so bad. Any woman, this little girl can run it. But GI Joe all the way.
You're gonna be G.I. Joe. I love
have
it.
to, it's red, white, and blue through the veins.
Got
you know?
to.
So my job, and actually, this is a true story about Stanley. When we were talking about powers, he said your power should be people. You like people. And I was like, I do love people, and I love championing it. And I think that shaped me a lot. But in the military, my job was adjutant general in a combat engineer unit, and that's just gathering information, making sure everybody communicates well, and then doing, just keeping the team together and morale. And I love doing that. I loved enjoying doing that. And I felt like GI Joe team, sometimes they should just talk to each other.
Cobra, can we sit down
So
and
would
just
we-
Just get to happy hour.
So would we say that you'd be a morale sergeant?
Yeah.
I think.
Or is that the right
think-
level, or would captain sergeant, like what do you think? What would you think would be appropriate? I don't know.
No, general's a good title.
Well,
General.
you see, you could be a general. You could be a morale, a general of morale.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Morale general.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
So yes, morale
Yes,
general.
absolutely. I'll
Okay,
be
and
the
I
one
got
that-
your name for you, by the way. Your
I
name's
was
already
gonna say,
locked
like,
in.
uh,
Unless you have it.
Team America, let's come back for cocktails and a debrief. I'm that person that's like, let's
Yeah,
do that.
it's okay. So you're the morale general. That's your rank, and that's your position. Do you have? I have.
I want to
have
hear your
the
name.
answer.
I want to
All right,
hear
let's
your
hear
name.
it.
Your name is Excelsior.
Oh, I love it.
Yes, that is
Yeah.
perfect. Thank
Yeah,
you. What an honor.
Your name is Excelsior, and you're the morale general.
I love
for the
it.
GI Joe team.
I love it.
Right here. What an
it
honor.
up.
Done.
That
Give it
is,
up.
Done.
right
Give
there.
it up to
brother.
Lens Cap and Excelsior.
Woo! This is
Yeah, Shirley.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. I can't say it enough. This was awesome. This was the right way to send this show out, with a bang.
Boom.
And I love having two people who are on here who are doing it legit and keeping it alive and helping and keeping everyone's dreams in motion. That's what you guys are all about. That's what VME is all about. Make sure you guys check them out there. And listeners, thank you for every episode of Joe and Joe you've listened. And we will see you in the future. And now you, Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.